We're here today to explore the body of work, and it's really great to have an opportunity to talk about this. For me, it's about experiencing the work. In my mind, I would love there to be some traction and this work to be taken and used, and my sense is it has potential. But it's so important that the work's experienced. So today I'd really like to talk more and explore with my friends here the value of the work and the benefit of the work and how far it can reach and impact and affect. This kind of writing is different and it has an invitation and a call in it. And so how do we convey this experience to you?
We want you to be able to hear the pieces in our conversations and translate it into your life and what's going on and past, present, future. And hopefully together we can go on this journey of making some changes, or at least making our foundations a bit stronger.
To talk about this work, I have to say a few words, a kind of small cameo of my own life, because this piece of writing came out of a period of living where there wasn't any answers for me at all. And I had to find a foothold, and my foothold was writing. When I was young, there was very few answers for me to the questions of life and living, and I was taken care of well at home, but there wasn't a lot of conversation or talking. And I noticed at a very young age, I remember thinking to myself, I'm a bit out of touch and at sea, and I'm kind of living two lives. So one life is what I called as a little boy, I'm okay. Whenever anybody asked me, I'm okay. And on the surface, I was friendly, I got involved, I integrated in life, I had my friends, everything was okay. But there was another feeling, and I called it lost inside. When I tried to understand myself or just get to know myself, I just felt out of touch. And that feeling was part of my childhood and growing up. And what I noticed I did as I started to grow up is I started to look externally to solve the internal puzzle. So it was my friends, it was what made me happy, my adventures, my artwork, which I love to do. It was doing things in the outer world that was to solve the internal puzzle. And I think that's what we generally do. But I spent my time doing that, and through school and elsewhere, I carried on achieving. And what I began to realize is I could achieve. I had, like most people, I had my serious restrictions and my gifts. But what I also noticed is when I achieved, it was a little bit like sand in the hand. It didn't really satisfy me deeply when I got my A-levels, even when I went to university. I was successful, but I wasn't fulfilled. And I kept coming back to this feeling, that ache inside. There's kind of two of me, and I'm still a bit out of touch and really not clear. And so I drew a line, in my late 20s, and I realized that I needed to change the way I related with myself. I needed to somehow understand and how to work this human clay in ways that would bring some connection between these two lives. And I needed to change something. And so I decided to look inside and to try and find answers to questions that had been around for a while. And there were a lot of questions. For example, what's my passion and purpose? There's a lot of things I was good at and I got paid for it. I was successful, but I didn't have that passion for at all. How do I really make a good choice for me rather than go along with things? Okay, kept getting caught up in that. My emotional reactivity, like most people, it kind of ruled my life, and I wasn't in conscious control of some of the patterns I had, and sometimes it would cause difficulties in relationships or otherwise. So there were lots of questions, and I knew that I had to do something to change the answer. And so I took what I call my wilderness journey, which is looking inside and seeking inside for solution, because frankly, nothing had worked on the outside that was going to continue to support me. And so I came to doing this piece of work, and it was in my early 30s. And I realized I needed a foothold in this kind of being with myself and learning about myself. And so I would write. And this writing I call evocative word. Basically, to me, writing and words are like a palette of paints. That's what they're like. And what I'm trying to do with language, with word, is to capture the essence of what's happening to me. I'm not trying to tell. I'm not trying to teach. I'm trying to, like colours in a picture captures an image, I'm trying to capture the essence of what's going on with me and speak the truth as it is. And and I love doing it. And when I do it, I get very lost and engaged with that process. So that was my way of tracking my, what I would call path. And it would cause me to question and hold questions. It would cause me to have inspiration and insight and realize things. And all the way I was going, I would track this work. And I always called it an evocative word. And I looked up the word evocative recently because I love language. And the root of evocative is a Latin word vocare, and it means to call. And I love this idea that you can create a piece of writing that is your experience, but that piece of writing, because it's about the human condition, it's about human life, can call to other people and call them in, have them share their experience. So I created this body of work. In its first form, it was written work, but I soon began to realize it was very flat on the page. When I saw it actually in the form of a book, I just felt this is very flat, and it doesn't come off the page. It doesn't open up and reach people in the way I would like. So then I began to experiment with audio, and this idea that we can pause and listen. In fact, part of the contemplation and the listening is the meditation, if you will, is to listen, really listen. So the nature of the work becoming audio changed its texture and feel, and I felt it became more accessible. At the same time, people took up some piece of the work and were wanting to compose music to it or offer pieces of music to it. And so music came into the mix as well. And this was very iterative. I did not have a plan. It just shaped up this way. And so we have this body of work now, which is in audio format and is evocative word. And there are tales and stories and pieces of narrative work and personal narrative. But what I found as life went on, it strongly influenced my life. But I also found that when I shared it, other people could find their connection with it as well. So that's how the body of work came into being.
When looking at your body of work and the things that you've done over the years, it's very clear that the body of work that you've written, you incorporate that into your life.
Yeah. And
you do your best to assist and to incite that same type of motivation in other people as well. Is there a way you can summarize it for those folks who are listening and are thinking, okay, what exactly is this about? What is this nitty gritty? Is there a way that you can summarize it, or can you put it in a paragraph or in a sentence or two that can really paint that mental picture to someone about what this whole thing entails?
I think I can, Mattison. And what's really funny about this is this was a question that was asked of me about a year ago by someone who I work with. And my original answer was, well, I really don't know how to summarize this work in a paragraph. And then the person who'd read my work said, well, there's this paragraph. And this is the strange thing about this work. In one level, I don't know what I've written because there's so much in it and other people see different things in it. So I can speak to the paragraph that she gave me, which I think is the essence of the work. But just before I get to the essence, the main message here is narrative and authoring and scripting. And what that means in our life. Do we author our lives? Do we script our lives? Or is our life written for us? And so this idea of authoring, authority, authenticity is the real piece for me. And what I found is when I took pen to paper and I narrated my experience, it had an impact in my capacity to become authentic. So there's something about owning the narrative, shaping the narrative, experiencing the narrative that had me grow. So if I wanted to kind of summarize this work, let me give you the paragraph. We are asked to evolve and grow in the very midst of things, to come to know ourselves more fully, to learn how to be and learn how to see into our human clay and find ways of working with it, to learn how to free ourselves from persistent ingrained habits that confine us and define us as small. In amongst everything, every day, we are being called into closer relationship with ourselves, towards insight and well-being, and away from the human plight of constant struggle. We are being quietly invited to be all that we can be, to come more fully into the light, and to breathe life into each day of living. So that's my paragraph, and it summarizes the work as a whole, the piece that I didn't even know I'd written. So that's where it is. But what I've been really interested in these last years is the currency of this work, the value of this work for us, for all of us. I think anyone who's trying to find their way in life, I think this work would have value. And when I look at all the pieces and all the stories and all the narrative as a whole, they point to life being a journey of gradually becoming conscious, aware, and responsive, rather than unconscious and reactive. And so it's a journey of awakening and discovery, right in the midst of things, right in the epicenter of the busyness and everything. And here, so it's in the difficulty and it's in the challenge that we're trying to find our way forward. And it's often the nature of the grittiness of that can shape up the circumstances where we can open and learn. And one of my things that I discovered when I looked into this was we have a role to play in finding our response to things. It's very important. The work as a whole holds messages of hope. And the message of hope, the work has glimpses of when it's got tough, when we're in the thick of it, often there is an opportunity to have a discovery of a treasure or something, insight, awareness, realization, right in the thick of it. And that is a great opportunity for us to live and learn if we participate in life. So how do we wake up more to life, and how do we participate fully in our lives? Mm-hmm. Because the tendency is that we'll step away from that or get caught in busyness or get lost. Mm-hmm. When I work with people, they come with a lot of demands of themselves. I want clarity. I want direction. I want to know what my passion is. I want to know what my mission is, my purpose. I want confidence. I want power. I want empowerment. I want resilience. And my message is that has to be claimed and owned and worked by our hands. Some of them, if you are fortunate, will be gifted, but many have to be discovered and found and recovered by us in life, right in the very, very midst of things. And so, and what I've noticed actually is that when people are offered the chance to step up and step in and do this work, they kind of prefer an uncomfortable sleep than a fresh wakefulness. People have a tendency to avoid it. So they want it, but it's hard to get. And so the questions that come to me very regularly in the work that I do is, where is my authentic response? How do I get out of this fog, this malaise, this caught-upness? People talk about being caught up, surviving life, unable to break the cycles, Right. And how do I find my growth in the midst of things, And am I aware of my part in gaining or losing, these qualities, these human conditions, these treasures that we want? What's my part in it?
You said something that I had to write down. I know, of course, your choice of words is on purpose. Mm-hmm. You said your response, as in responding, not reacting, but responding. Mm-hmm. Basically, what's the difference between responding and reacting?
Yeah. So for me, the difference is about awareness and about choice and about response. So for me, with awareness comes choice, comes response. What I often find in my own life and what I've found in other people's life is we do not develop the awareness. We continue to operate in the same zone with the same perception. And so we tend to react, not respond. And what we tend to do when faced with difficult circumstances and decisions is not to form awareness and choice, but to kind of hover like a cursor suspense. And in that place, we resign, not respond. And many, many times we haven't formed the action of deciding. And this is a really important point for me to say, that if we do not regularly find our choice of response, then we start to lose touch with ourselves. Because we're not defining who we are and how we are and what matters and what's important. So this word response, connected to the work, is a key word for me.
I know that there are a few other key words that I've heard you mention: passion, purpose, authenticity, of course, journey, conscious, and being aware. All of these are buzzwords or keywords that each one of us, in a certain point in our life, these words are going to have some type of effect. These words, you're going to ask yourself these questions. What am I passionate about? What's my purpose? How can I be authentic to myself? Am I being conscious? Am I being aware? How am I going to respond to the situation? How am I going to respond to what's going on? And those are lovely words for people to think about, especially as we continue our conversation today. And even for listeners at home, just think about those words: passion, purpose, authenticity, being conscious and being aware, and responding.
And if I can take those words and just wrap them back to the first theme as well, which is becoming author in our lives, becoming the cause, the shaping of something, rather than having life written for us. And this kind of begins to take us towards the piece that we want to talk about today, Queen, that we're going to experience and talk about. Would you like me to say a few words about that?
Please do,
piece?
Yes.
Okay, so life's pretty tough, and we use words like being authentic, but what does it really mean, and how do we discover our authentic stance? And even if we have a sense of it, why do we back away from being true to ourselves? So this piece, Queen, is about integrity of being true to ourselves and trusting in ourselves, and moment to moment learning to live that as an experience that will shape our life, shape our energy, shape our being, and shape our actions. However, it's very difficult to do because we are constantly bombarded by the expectations of others, conforming, and obligations. And so there's an inherent sacrifice in the situation when we start looking at authenticity. How do I see into myself? How do I come to know myself? How do I work and shape my claim ways that serve me and have me live my life rather than survive it? And in fact, again, I'm a coach and I'm a therapist, so I love questions. Again, a piece like Queen raises questions. And I love questions. I would say to people I'm working with, please hold this question for 6 months. Don't give it one answer, just hold it for 6 months. And Queen raises questions, this piece about choosing an authentic response rather than sacrifice and compliance and obligation. The questions are, what is this life I'm choosing to live? When do we pause and look at ourselves dispassionately and compassionately, not judgmentally? What kind of life am I living? Am I living my life, or is life living me? This is a very interesting question, but it's worth asking, because how do I walk the fine line of living what really matters? And if I nurture my authentic roots, do I kind of kill the shoots before they come? Do I take 1 step and 2 steps back? Am I really living a life true to what I believe in, what I feel in, and what is my own sense of me? So these questions are really important questions, and I would encourage people listening, and all of us, gently and respectfully, to take them into reflection and to consider them, because even though they're uncomfortable and even though they're difficult, they stir a thirst inside to know, to comprehend, to understand. And it's almost like a shoot that's growing, What I've also found is that when human beings are offered a choice of response, they back away from it. They remain hesitant and questioning at the door of authentic living. And I have seen it time and again, and I have seen it in the mirror with me. And I think until we study what it is that stops us doing that, and having a respect for that and an awareness for that, then we can get to choice and response. So, how many obligations are on us? How much compliance is on us? How much pressure, peer pressure and otherwise, to perform? We could go on and on. Parental pressure. There's so much that we have to define ourselves by and with. So Queen is a story about someone who's put in a very painful position to choose between obligation and sacrifice or authentic response. And it's a common thing when you think about it. How many times in a day and a week that we are actually in that situation? This person has, amidst all the expectations that's put on them, finds their authentic response. And it raises the question, what is the price of freedom? And she answers that question through her actions. And what she considers, Queen, is there is a price to freedom, but in terms of authentic living, the act of freedom, the act of choice is priceless. So I don't want to say much more about the piece than that, but maybe we can listen to the piece now and we can explore some of those thoughts and reflections.
That's a great idea. Let's listen to Queen.
Queen. Once upon a time there was a princess, a woman of great beauty and charm. Even as a child, her father would hold her up to the world and say, "See this jewel, this gift, see how her beauty shines." She wears the gown of serenity even though she barely stands. She is queen in this palace, ruler in this heartland. And many wondered at the child's particular grace, this face that always met the greatest of beauty's expectations, and the quiet, carefully chosen words placed as if threading beads. Yet in the evening, when the palace was finally silent, she would run down the halls, momentarily stroking the walls with her small shadow. Out into the dark night air and the embroidered sky of stars, to bathe in the forest. Bathe in it, swim in it, taste the moisture in the air, reach with cupped hands to the roof of woven trees, and then to fall wondrously silent, whispering. Here is where my heart rests in the song of the night breeze. How strange that these black shapes are a blessing. How strange that my heart beats with its own thirst when I am free beneath the night sky canopy and dome. How strange that here is my home. Then she would run faster and harder than ever before, white satin taking the momentary form of ecstatic limbs, singing with this freedom. I am in love with being free. This forest lives inside of me. The king said, "Come, child, you are a woman grown, now sit by me. There is a kingdom soon for your keeping. There is a throne, and we, your parents, wish to offer you this. Great beauty you possess, and wise you have become through your watching ways, through your perfect presence. What beauty God has given us! Praise be to God." The king spoke as he let his firm back rest upon the golden metal of his throne. "See your kingdom, child, soon queen. You are home." But she was not home. She was not home with this gift. Too much the weight of this commitment so soon offered by a father not listening for a voice's return. Being without knowledge of the ripening woman inside and her world of yearning. And tears fell, as they only do when one must somehow make a stand. Yet either way, it is as if a fist is being shaken. I love my parents and wish to do their will. But there is a power in me, filling me, spilling all of my parents' wishes. It is as if a death comes either way, by any action I make in my own name. I lame myself in standing, or become tame to obedience. Either is a soul shame. The forest that night seemed to close in. And she went wild with her struggling, feeling like the seed that splits its shell, only to fall on driest soil. And she took the earth and rubbed it into her face, so that the smearing hid her staring eyes and what they saw in the fears appearing. She gowned herself in leaves and pulled them to her, wishing that they might take her beautiful shape and make of it bark, or lichen-covered rock, all so that life might stop this living of her and let her soul rest. And gone was she in the tree wilderness, fast and running. Then finally slow and so still that no one would have known a princess held the space. No one would have noticed the silent, lowly, staring face. Then quietly, again looking upwards, she whispered, "Grace me with wisdom." Grace me with an elixir to help me across this great divide, across this great space over which I cannot travel, this distance that will surely swallow my stride. voice from somewhere inside answered, "Sip yourself. Come out of hiding and take residence in your being." The next day the throne room shone like gold. Each jewel took the daylight as if together they were a loom of finest threads being cast into brilliance. The throne waited, as structures of authority do, aloof and definitive, never patient. The king busied himself in final preparations, chanting as he did, "I am the happiest man that ever lived." The princess came slowly into the space. Pearl skin, faintly paler, yet purer for it, now without a blemish from the night ritual. She raised her right hand and pointed to the throne. The king and queen looked up, startled to see her there, partway down the walk that had been so ornately planned. Their daughter had preempted their preparations. Then was the moment, and then was the sealing of fate meeting destiny. The act before all living beings and all of the gods that could not go unseen. Her statement. The act that would make of her a queen. She took off her cloak of purple and gold and rested it on the throne. The world fell into silence. She went to one of the waiting guards and took his knife from its leather pouch. Then she took a youthful crop of her golden hair and severed it. Placing it on the throne, she whispered quietly but clearly, "This is the beauty you see." Then she moved to her father, the king, whose arms had already fallen to his side. She moved slowly, without a hint of self-consciousness, without a blemish of premeditation. She took the knife blade and drew it lightly across her white wrist, so that it caught the skin surface with the smallest hairline groove. Seeds of blood soothed the whiteness. Coral blood. She spoke calmly. "Look, this is the first time you have seen me." Then she moved to a place beside of the thrones and held herself for moments in the rhythm of her heartbeat. Then she looked directly at her parents and into the great weight of their broken expectation. She saw their love, their carefully considered intent, and was washed over by a wave of compassion. Then she spoke. "I must offer my dying on this altar if that is what you wish, for I will die for you. What I will not do is live for you. For every step that marks my way must come from within. I must become lost in my forests and learn to choose my path, learn to suffer my living, and learn to soothe myself in moments of regret and forgiving. Learn to find each new beginning. Learn to let what is hidden from me quietly settle and come to life, so that there is a possibility of acquaintance and friendship. I have a kingdom of my own that needs a ruler. And perhaps, at some time, I might feel grown and worthy, ready to take on this mantle. But it is not now. With deepest sorrow and yet clearest view, I must put this precious life for living ahead of you. It is with love I say this, for any other form of compliance would be deception and defeat. I must go into my forest, meet myself, and complete this life that you have graced with a beginning. A cloud passed over the morning sun, and in the great hall it was as if a mighty hand had gently brushed her words, bathed them momentarily as a child's forehead is touched in baptism. And those who witnessed these words covered their mouths and said to others, "Indeed, she is greatness itself, and queen." So much of her that had been overlooked, been covered over and gone unseen. Others covered their eyes, as parents do when they acknowledge the penance of parenthood for their crime of seeing through their children. And it is true to say that none can purely stand aside in guilt, for part of a child's adulthood is sifting through their parents' silt. So she left. So much a queen in every stride, so much a woman coming into her own, and so much a mistress of her home. And each step was marked with a single droplet of blood left to dry on the purple-polished floor. Her heart bled for the space she was leaving, confronting her grieving parents behind the closing door. That night she went before the stars again, only to be with all the weight of her day's words. The nightingale sang its musical cascade, and this tapestry of sound eased her. Wisdom is the heaviest of gifts, she said, and yet no other thing will bring me into blossoming. This wisdom is the mark of me, the extent of my search, the depth of my listening, and the reach of my acceptance. I know it to be my truth, my mark. It is the birth of my way. She caught the shape of a flower. Daytime pink, now dappled grey. And yet how wonderful, she thought. Even in the darkness, to know my colour.
So we have just listened to Queen. Is there a few words you would like to say about the piece before we kind of break it down and go a little bit more in depth into some things?
My study is always to see how this work lands with other people and what kind of conversation and response it builds. So in this instance, I'd love to hear from others, and then I'll bring in my voice again.
I've listened to this twice. The first time I heard it, it instantly made me go to a female perspective, obviously queen. My mind went to what my definition of a queen is in the culture that I've been exposed to. And I've had the pleasure of knowing people that have always tried to lift other women and say, hey, we all wear a crown, we shouldn't be competing with each other, we're all queens. And that's where my mind first went when I listened to it. I was thinking, yes, this is a transformation obviously she was becoming a literal queen of this kingdom, but at the same time, she wasn't a queen yet. She still had to go and learn to be responsible, not just for other people, but for herself. She had to experience things first and gain wisdom to then take on responsibility of other people. That's obviously me summarizing that quite a bit. But that's where my mind first went, was, okay, you know, not every person, not every woman is a queen straight away. But when we're learning, when we're developing, when we're maturing, it's okay to take up and put your damn crown on. You know, you've earned this. You're learning, you're developing, you're helping other people, and that's what queens do. And in my culture, that's what you do. When you're confident, when you are bringing other people up around you, that is, in my culture that I've been around, that's what the definition of a queen is a woman that is a matriarch, a pillar, a strong woman. Not because nothing phases her, but because when things do, she takes it. She takes the bricks that people throw at her and she builds a new foundation, and that's the definition for me. The second listening of it was interesting. The whole idea that she goes to her parents and then she draws a knife across her wrist. Not that she was trying to kill herself. No. She was just saying, I'm only human. I bleed. I'm not this holier than thou thing, this, this ideal being just because I look a certain way, just because I portray myself a certain way. I am still human. I'm still going to make mistakes and I'm still going to learn, and I need to. But I think it'd be a nice way, I think, if I needed to tell my parents I was going through a difficult time or struggling with my identity or whatever it is. I would personally be quite happy to put this in front of them and listen to it with them and hope that they would get where I was coming from. I think it's a nice way of putting it, a nice way of using it. But at the same time, it might actually, stir up a lot of negative feelings in that person, thinking it's not that simple. There's a lot more to it, and and she has a happy ending in the end because she gets to choose what she's doing. And a lot of parents, unfortunately, won't be as understanding and forgiving, and they just think, pull yourself together. We're doing this because it's what's best for you. So it's good in a sense because I think they'll be able to connect with the work. And at the same time, I think it'll make them think, you know what, maybe I won't have the same outcome with my parents totally understanding my situation. But the fact that she was brave enough to tell them what she wanted to do, who she was, and she had no idea how they were going to react. So maybe that's what I need to do too. I think someone else listening to it can think, okay, it's all open. There's no way of controlling how other people are going to feel about what you're about to tell them. Obviously, she did it in a very respectful way. Obviously, some would say it a bit dramatic by drawing blood, but the fact she said a little hairline cut. So basically just enough to make her bleed, just to show she's human. And that, I think, will be very powerful for those people to realize, okay, yes, the point was being made to say, I am a human being. I have my own thoughts. I have my own worries. I have my own idea of what... I don't know exactly what I want to do now, but I know this isn't it. And I don't want to do this right now. And I think that's going to be very helpful. And even if there's people that aren't old enough to maybe understand the work fully, their parents, they might be able to understand it enough to at least maybe it affects how they approach these things should it happen. So second time listening to it was a bit more of a not so positive experience, but it was still just as valuable because, like you said, discomfort is necessary, and that's the reason why most of us, when we're faced with, facing things or moving forward, we choose to have an uncomfortable sleep instead. we'd rather just not think about it, not go through the process because it's uncomfortable, and I'll just rather just have this little thing bubbling in the back but just be oblivious and try not to even think about it. I think that a piece of work like this and other works of yours, no matter how many times you listen to it, you might actually have completely different reactions each and every time, depending on what's going on in that person's life, what's been going on in the news, what a person needs from it at that particular time. So if I was a woman that was feeling like a piece of meat, which a lot of us do feel quite often in our lives, there's been many times I thought, you know what, maybe I shouldn't have lost that weight. Maybe I should have just been overweight and stayed that way. Maybe I shouldn't wear makeup anymore because I was being blamed by society for being attacked by men. It's your fault for looking the way you do, for wearing the short dress, for doing this. So I was like, okay, I've felt that way, wanting to pull the leaves, to change my shape, to blend in, to not stand out, because that was safe. I hope that the main message that someone will get from this is time. It takes time to get wisdom, and it takes time to conquer your own wilderness. It takes time to become that person that can help other people. And if you're not that person yet, then that's okay to tell people, I want to help. I really do. I'm not the right person for it right now. Give me time. You know, I don't know everything. And one day, hopefully, I can be that person that you can come to, and I can be that person to take on responsibility.
There are elements in the story that I feel very closely connected to, especially when growing up in a home of two very accomplished parents who are great at what they do, who are pillars of the community, who do things in their own individual lives as well as together that have made a difference in so many people's lives. Growing up in a household like that, there is just an expectation of you that is higher than that of your peers. It's not necessarily saying that they don't have any expectations they have to live up to in their own homes. It's just that within my realm or my world of understanding and how it relates to me, my level of expectation is clearly on a different, it seems as if it's on a completely different scope. That being said, like I said before, everyone has their own expectations you have growing up. There were certain things between the words of the king and then the words of the princess, of the things that she's saying to herself, things that she's saying to her parents. There's certain bits of the dialogue that I could either imagine parents saying to their children. I don't think some people recognize or understand the weight of their expectations on a child, whether or not they are very demanding about it, or they could be very just laissez-faire, kind of chill about it. Either way, there is a certain amount of expectations that is put on the child that a lot of times the parent is not even aware of.
Not looking for her answer.
Right.
So even though they're not saying this is what's happening, they're still not waiting. They're not waiting and giving you the opportunity to say, actually, no, it's not what I
Father
want.
not listening for a voice's return. That's and I know that many people feel that throughout their life, whether it is a parental figure, whether it is something at your job, or just someone in general in life. You always come in contact with someone who is just not up for listening to really your response, but they are more of talking at you, to projecting on you, and how you feel, your interpretations, your thought process is completely irrelevant.
And also, if I can just add, the next piece is, and being without knowledge of the ripening woman inside and her yearning. And so without knowledge of the ripening young man inside and his yearning. So it's not just not listening, it's without that knowledge of the inner, because often it's not expressed or it's not even seen.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And when you go for such a long time with not being seen, you know, if you go for an extended amount of time with not being seen, not being heard, after a while, you can begin to have that inner turmoil. Well, not can, you will end up having that inner turmoil. You will try and you will come to a point to where you want to understand, okay, where do I fit into this? Honestly, where do I fit in? Because at some point, you're not going to be there. You're not going to be underneath that roof. You're not going to be underneath that scope. You're not going to be within that controlled environment that you were in before. Now, years and years of the situation, you will get to a certain point to where you have to ask yourself, what am I doing here? You know, there's a certain point in the story where the princess says, how strange that here is my home. You know, being there and not recognizing where you are. Whether you were in that same environment you were in growing up, or you're in a completely different environment, either way, at some point, you will sit there and you'll say, this isn't where, no, something's not right. So going further along in this story, another point that really stuck out to me was when she says, I'm in love with being free. This forest lives inside of me. Take that what you will. Everyone can have their own interpretation of it. But there is something about being able to release what you have, that pent up energy, that those feelings of anxiousness, those feelings of not really sure. There's something about being able to look at it, recognize it for what it is, understand that you need to change, and doing your best to make that change, at least going towards that. There's something very freeing about that. It is like a young forest before it blossoms and blooms. Seeds scattered everywhere. There's roots deeply planted. You see little saplings, little things kind of growing. And then as time progresses through the storm, through everything else, through the journeys, the burning down, or whatever calamity may happen, at some point, if left to its own devices, it will grow into this massive, insane ecosystem. You know, this rainforest. You will have the Amazon if you just leave it to its own thing. Nature will take its course. It'll burn away. It'll grow again. It'll do the same process until you have something that is filled with richness, something that's very foundation, breeds life.
So you're speaking of kind of the freedom, in love with being free, but also this potency and this potential insight that might come to fruition even with calamity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There is some type of peace and beauty within calamity in and of itself.
Yes.
You know, you hear in the eye of the storm is where it's the calmest. And a lot of times in life, that is true. At some point when everything is flying all around you, you know, trees and houses and the random cow flying in front of you, at some point while you're in there, you could call it an epiphany. You could call it God speaking to you, whatever you want to call it. At some point, everything is still. You will find that stillness. You will have that little piece of wisdom that seeps into your ear, and then it just kind of spreads throughout your entire body. Something will calm you and get you to the point to where you realize your actual potential. You realize a bit more of who you are. You haven't yet figured it out, but you realize a bit more who you are, and you have to be more open to taking that journey to figure it out. And in Queen, that's what it seems like she was doing. Yeah,
and I think the connection with nature, obviously that's a theme throughout all your work. There's always a forest or a plain or a pool, or, you know, there's always this nature element to all your work. And in a way, I think that's what we do. We are a forest because we are an ecosystem. We have different aspects of our personality that all somehow have to coexist in our brain or in our, you know, and in our environment. And I think burning down our forest is a good thing, just like it is in nature. That's how nature gets rid of pathogens. That's how nature gets rid of the disease. It's all necessary. And then once that is clean, it's like a new slate. And then the new shoots come up, because you can't completely destroy nature with fire. It's impossible.
Right.
That's what seeds are designed to do. They're designed to withstand disaster, because that's what they need. It's now my turn. It's like, cool.
So it's a kind of cleansing.
It's a cleansing, yes. And I think that's what we have to do. We have to do what nature does, and we have to burn everything and be like, obviously not quite literally.
Not physically burning.
Please, no one burn yourselves. Don't set yourself alight. But, hypothetically or
Yes.
Emotionally or spiritually.
Right.
But the thing for me in this story, and connecting both your themes really, is this thing about we take ownership of our life. So the forest will grow anyway, but at a certain point we can choose to cultivate, we can choose to tend, we can choose to cleanse. And in that act, somehow, like you were describing it, Mattison, at some point in this potency of the forest, by this act of self-worth and work, self-worth and work, we somehow begin to experience our root system, experience our growth, and experience our presence in the world. So we could easily abdicate.
Right.
I love your idea of a crown. I love this description of the powerful matriarch woman with a crown. But it made me wonder about. She says, "I too have a kingdom of my own that needs a ruler." But I wonder how many times I've lived life uncrowned, and I wonder how many times people exist rather than live, and don't wear the crown of here's a life worth living. Here's my opportunity, my chance.
I assume, I honestly think that happens quite often. That we are stuck in this pattern of, you're stuck in the pattern of surviving a lot of the times. You're not, like you said, you're not fully living. You're not being yourself. So when you're stuck in this pattern of surviving, it's something that you've had to do since you were a child. You've had to cope. You've had to deal with. You've had to survive. You had to just move forward. Doing that and again creates those calluses, on your soul, on your heart. It makes you a bit more like, okay, this is the usual. I'm used to it. This is fine. You get so stuck in this particular way of doing things, to where when you see that little peek into actually living, or that little peek of your truth, like you mentioned before, sometimes you're just like, I'm gonna go to sleep. I'm gonna take a nap. This is way too much. Nah, I'm comfortable with where I am. But back to what was said in the story, then was the moment, and then was the sealing of fate meeting destiny, the act before all living beings and all of the gods that could not go unseen. Her statement, the act that would make of her a queen. That specific act, that moment, to where you gather your things up and your response is, I don't know what the outcome is. I don't know exactly the direction I'm being headed. But what I do know is that where I am isn't it, and I have to go figure it out. And hopefully, whoever is on the receiving end of that can either accept that, or can learn to accept that, or at least open themselves up enough to take what you've said and to say, Godspeed.
It's you picked the pinnacle point in the story, and the big question that it raises for me, for all of us, for you in your journey, for me in my journey. How do we know? How do we know our power? How do we know? If we stand on condition of getting it right and everything being well, we'll never stand.
No.
And so this thing that goes witnessed by the people, by all the gods, it must go unseen, this witness, this stand that will make of her a queen. I think from time to time in life, there are setups for those moments when we have to choose between being an author and a script writer, or have life written for us. And I believe, in my experience of life and people and great opportunities I've had to live and learn, that there's consequences. And there's something, your major point, this stand of itself is generative. It can germinate something. And I think this is really important. And you mentioned it as well, about this power of the Queen women to just stand. You can't get it right, but you can stand.
Yeah.
And that can have value.
I really connected with the wisdom is the heaviest of gifts, because I feel like the more wise I get, the more I have to control my frustration with others.
Yeah.
And when you see someone going through the same pattern over and over and over again, and you just want to shake them sometimes, like, seriously, snap out of it.
Right.
Because you can't do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result.
Right.
And it's like you said, the uncomfortable slumber or sleep. They'd rather, instead of just getting uncomfortable and learning to strike out and try something else, or just give themselves a break or just stop, they'd rather go with what they know, which is like a temporary comfort or whatever it might be, that then will lead them to go into that same pattern.
That's it.
You know, and then you now are feeling like you now have to deal with letting or just watching people carry on in that same pattern. And you're thinking, once you take that first step, even though it's uncomfortable, it gets easier and easier, because you get more practiced with it. You realize there's a much better outcome in the end, and that keeps you motivated.
I love it. So there's a kind of human algorithm, which you do one and you can do another. But this thing about grace me with wisdom, which runs through the whole piece, it's such an important piece, because she says, grace me with an elixir that will get me across this great divide, because otherwise it's going to swallow my stride. And then these words come from nowhere, sip yourself, come out of hiding.
You are your elixir.
Yeah, you are. It's exactly. Sip yourself, come out of hiding, take residence in your being. So this is the act of power. We can take residence. We don't have guarantees, but we can take residence in our being. And this is the grace. This is the grace of wisdom. And unless we leap, we don't know. And the gift is to own the step and own the power and experience it. And there are consequences if we don't.
So in order for someone to take this step, in order for someone to make this leap of faith, when it comes to finding the courage to do that, it's not a blanket thing.
No.
It's just something, it's not a quick thing that we could just say, oh, if you do this, you'll find the courage. But in your own life, how have you been able to find that courage? How have you been able to gather that inspiration just enough for you to look at the direction you think you need to go, or for you to open that door? Like, how was that for you? How did you gather that?
So the $1 million question.
Of course.
So I'll answer it first by looking at Queen and then give you my answer from my experience. So if we look into Queen, the little treasures that the piece gives is nurture an inner life. Go into the forest, experience the forest, understand what freedom is to you. Understand, tap into this place of being. So if you're on a constant treadmill and you're on an automated train track all of your life, and you neglect any sense of what matters to you and what brings you happiness and what cultivates energy and inspiration, then we gradually lose touch with ourselves because we're out of touch. So the first message is nurture an inner life, pause, experience yourself, stay with the questions. Now, what I've found in life, and it happened for Queen as well, you'll get tested on that boundary. And if you neglect it, the tests will come and they'll be tough. And of course, she doesn't have every, as you were saying, Nay, she doesn't have every answer. She doesn't. She just knows that, this forest, this forest, strangely, is my home. And yet, when the king says, there is a kingdom here for your taking, come sit by me, and then he says, you are home. But home is it's something we create, and being not at home is a common human scenario. So the first message is nurture an inner life. Pause, take time, value these things that you notice that move you. Try and develop a closer relationship with yourself. Look at what expression means for Adrian Machon or Mattison. Look what that means and honour it and be with it. And if you don't know the answer, sit with the question. Give that relationship, the most underdeveloped relationship in the world is one with self. I can speak from watching it time and time again. So why don't we nurture and nourish that relationship in the spirit of living a life and serving and being able to, like the queens in your story, be an example of empowerment, but also giving. So nurture an inner life. And the second message is take the leap. Now, the courage has to be in understanding the nature of who we are. If we don't leap, we effectively lose touch. So with an understanding of the human condition and that the clay is moldable and developing that inner life, then awareness brings choice and response. So find your moment. It's not every time as you described it. We're allowed to be human. We're allowed to be fragile. We're allowed to hesitate. However, the leap is in order to know. And without the leap, then there will be consequences in our sense of self, in our strength, in our conviction, and in our ability to narrate or author our lives and shape things as we would wish. So knowing that, courage comes.
What I thought was interesting is even though there's a princess involved, you didn't end the story with her getting married to become queen, which is a very common narrative, isn't it? And I thought that's good because actually, regardless if she became queen without being married or she was just, or she had to marry to become queen, she still had to take that time for herself.
Most definitely.
So I thought that was interesting that even though you didn't end it the typical sort of fairy tale way with queens and kings and princesses, it still put her in the center of her decision making. So
that's exactly correct.
Yes, and I thought that was good because however you identify yourself, when you're looking to, if you have to be in a relationship with someone else in order to feel comfort, that's not a good place to be. And it's only ever going to be a temporary comfort because you haven't got a relationship with yourself. No one else can have a relationship with you if you can't have a relationship with you. It's impossible. They're not going to...
The people in the back can't hear you.
Right.
That was...
And I'm just thinking, and that's another thing with the wisdom. I remember I was single for almost 2 years and someone approached me. Nothing wrong with them. They were a really decent human being, but my wisdom told me no. And it's not because they wouldn't have been a good match. It's because I knew I was still doing something for me. And it was a selfish... I was made to feel very selfish by this person because they were like, oh, what's the matter? You're single, I'm single, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no. It's just no. Because my heart, mind, whatever it was I was in charge at the time, was telling me, no, I need this time. I'm not broken. I'm not trying to, at least I didn't think I was trying to heal from anything. I was just happy. And I just wanted to stay in that state. And maybe it was my inner queen or whoever saying, this wasn't going to contribute to your happiness.
Well, you're touching on something so fundamental, and there isn't language around this that's helpful. And when I've been working with people, this is very difficult because you get called selfish by investing in yourself. Now, if we stay in the primal state, dipping in and out the forest but never being authentic, then we do become self-absorbed. Strangely enough, by not acting, we become very self-absorbed because we overthink and we overprocess, and we also become self-sacrificing. We don't speak for what we are. We don't speak the words. We don't stand. And so it's self-absorbed and self-sacrificing. Ironically, the kind of step that you're taking, I call it selfness, because there isn't anything in the language, because otherwise giving attention to yourself can seem selfish, self-absorbed. But this investment in this relationship with self brings an ending of self-absorption and an ending of self-sacrifice and a clarifying not just of our power and our capacity, but what we can bring to others.
Yeah.
So I had to invent a word for it, because otherwise people would naturally, in their natures, and often led by kind of religious and spiritual convictions, you really shouldn't focus on yourself, give to others. But if you don't do this work, I can promise you one thing, you'll default to self-sacrifice.
Yes.
While looking through the text and listening through, an important thing, not necessarily just when it comes to the princess or the queen, the other important thing is the response of the parents, the response of that authority figure, the response of whoever's on the receiving end of you explaining that you need to go through what you have to go through. A important part of that is listening, not just hearing, but listening. Can you go into any type of details about that?
Yeah, well, I can just say a few words, but it took me back to the Queen text at the point where she says, I can put myself on the altar and I can die for you, but what I can't do is live for you. And I think we all have children, we all have young adults, but it's very easy to box children as children, idealize women, put certain boxes and labels, or men. And even in families, we're given different roles. And I think that the key message for me in all of this, in the parent role, is please do not see through your children. Don't look through them, as the piece says. You don't see them. She has to do extreme things to say, look, I'm not just this serene human being with beauty. I'm living, and there's a life in here, and it's already taking it. The forest is already flourishing. And I don't really know what everything is, but I do know I'm alive.
Do you think that's like showing? Do you think it's something that of showing some type of vulnerability? Is that what it is?
I think I think it's in the parental role. I think there's a really important point where we stop seeing our children as children. I mean, I see some cultures in the world that continue to see. I hear people they've got children of 35 and 40 and say, "It's still my child." And I often think to myself, yes, it is still your child at one level. This is an adult. And I think this idea of adult, and really seeing people as beings, really listening and coming to understand their view, their life, as opposed to this habitual tell and this habitual, and with good intentions, best intentions. The throne was offered, the kingdom was offered with good intentions, but you're missing this living being. So at a certain point, and it's quite young these days in my experience, 10, 11, 12, 13, come to realize this is a young adult, listen, give time and listen, guide, but instead of parent-child has so much tell in it. It has so much advice, and it boxes the being into something small. And these beings have got so much to deal with in this world, they're probably growing faster than we ever did. Mm-hmm. So nurture the shoots, nourish the shoots, and listen. I
think, equip them at the very least, because you can't shield them from this world anymore. And I think they've also put a lot of responsibility of parenting on teachers. Like, I've literally walked past schools on my way to go for coffee or something, and I'm listening to parents having a go at teachers because their children aren't potty trained. And I'm thinking, that's not the teacher's job. How is that? Right. But I feel like there's a lot of pushing of responsibility away from the person that brought that human being into the world. It's like, they didn't ask to be born. No one does. Right. No one that's here today asked to be here. So if you're going to bring someone into this world as, confusing and some may say messed up as it is right now, hopefully it'll get better. But at the moment, this is what we're dealing with. There's a lot of amazing things in this world that we should be grateful for. Right. Things have changed a lot than how they used to be in a positive way. We don't have, there's still somewhat of a slave trade and things like that, but on a global scale, we've all recognized that that's not okay. And that's something we need to always recognize, how far we've come. I can sit here and talk to you And I can go and get to a dentist and have 2 Caucasian, blonde, blue-eyed dentists work on me, and they will see me as a person, not as below them. And that's progress. That's something, every time it happens, I'm like, this is amazing, because my grandmother wouldn't have had that. So that's something I'm constantly reminding myself.
But when I listen to you as well, and it happens often as I get to know you, but one of the things that I realise is when you've had the adversity and when you've been treated more as a minority or boxed, it could have defeated you and depleted you, but it's actually strengthened you.
Oh gosh, yes.
And I think this is that authentic stance again about what we have facing with us. Do we take a victim path and, a victim in the jaw and just say, the world's wrong, it's not for me, I'm treated badly, get over it, this is the way it is? Or do you take a stance with it? And my sense is when we take our step with adversity, with the world as it's not, and we take our place with that, and we put our voice to that, then there's something else that we add, but we're also strengthening.
Yeah.
So going back to Queen, take residence in your being.
Exactly.
And that's that's a living example for me of taking residence in your being.
Sometimes people want to dull your light, and sometimes people want to put you in the shadows and make you feel you're less because of it. But it doesn't matter, because you know your color. You know your color, you know your light, you know your being. So just let it. Just remind yourself every time it's a bit dark that you're still there. You're never going to change, and you're only dim if you let that circumstance dim you.
Yeah,
I agree. This has been a very it's been an informative conversation. It's been enlightening for myself, and I hope that it is for the listeners as well. I do want to thank you both for being here, taking time out of your day, and thank you for joining us on this wonderful
thank you.
on this journey that we're going on, and giving your perspective and what you've taken out of this. Adrian, a massive thanks to you as well.
You're very welcome.
For, of course, allowing me to be a part of this wonderful thing that you have created. I want to see how it flourishes, and I want to see how people take it and how they not only insert it and use it in their own life, but also how they can help others with it, the whole pay it forward kind of a thing. Yeah. I want to see what other people do with this to help and inspire someone else.
Yeah.
Which is what you've done for me, which is what hopefully we can use this platform to do for someone else, and it keeps going.
Well, that would be wonderful. And I don't see this as my child, this piece of work. I see it as my adult. It's my honest expression of life and living. And I just find it fascinating and incredibly enriching to listen to people's human and heartfelt responses to it. So thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely. We will have to do this at some point again in the future. We'll talk about some of the pieces, and hopefully we can have more conversations on societal things as well. I think we can put some more things about what's happening in today's current set in time, and we can see what we can come out of that one as well.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.